So again, do not think heads up no limit hold'em is as easy as following a preflop chart. Preflop charts are great, but if your opponent will respond poorly because perhaps they're not using the preflop charts or because they think something about your strategy, then you should get out of line to exploit them. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, and do you know what time it is? Well, it is heads up season. It is the fall, so that means everyone is ready to get outside and battle in the cool, crisp air at the Cadillac of poker, no limit Texas style. So today, we are going to be discussing basic pre-flop, heads up, no limit hold'em strategy. And to be fair, if you want to be a strong cash game player, you have to be comfortable playing heads up because every once in a while, that is what the game devolves to. And if you can find yourself playing heads up against a weaker player, you're in a very good spot. So in this webinar, you will learn strong heads up, no limit hold'em fundamentals, GTO pre-flop ranges and bet sizes, and also pre-flop adjustments you should be making. So 100 big blinds deep, heads up, no limit hold'em. The larger you raise before the flop from the button, the tighter your raising range should be. Whenever you are playing heads up, by the way, if you are very new to the game, when you are on the button, you are also in the small blind, so you get to go first. The button has to go first before the flop, but then they get to go last after the flop. And it is highly advantageous to be on the button. And in general, when you are on the button, if you know the player in the big blind is going to be folding a decent amount of the time, that should result in you raising more often. So if you happen to find yourself against a particularly weak opponent who folds their big blind to a raise quite often, that should result in you raising more often, which in turn should lead to you using a smaller pre-flop raise size. Also, the more often the big blind 3-bets, the more frequently you should fold the button. So you're going to find that if you are in the big blind, 3-betting somewhat frequently is a powerful strategy, especially if you know the player on the button is going to be opening with a decently wide range. Here are what we'll call default sizes before the flop. And I do want to make it clear that there actually are various strategies you can use before the flop in heads up no limit hold'em. Some people think that you should only use what has been solved to be the absolute most profitable strategy, which is to raise to 2.5 big blinds pre-flop. Then if you 3-bet, it's going to be to about 10 big blinds. Then if the player on the button is going to 4-bet, it's to 23 big blinds. And then a 5-bet is all in for 100 big blinds. But it is certainly possible to develop other strategies, like one where you limp sometimes from the button, or where you 4x pre-flop, right? It's certainly viable to have a limping strategy or a 4x strategy. And that is a-okay. It is okay to have various strategies, sometimes very mixed together, and you're going to be able to have roughly the same EV from that position. And to be fair, if your opponent plays against a particular strategy quite poorly, then maybe you should not use these default sizings that most players have come to know. It's kind of like when you're playing chess and you use a very different opening move than your opponent is used to. And if you studied that opening a ton and your opponent's never studied it at all, even if that opening is slightly worse than the GTO strategy, it could lead to more profit because your opponent may play somewhat poorly against it. So anyway, these are the default sizings, and this is typically what I do against someone who I think is just not all that great at poker. But if I do think my opponent is great at poker, perhaps even better than I am at heads up no limit hold'em, I may start mixing it up by using some limping, using some bigger raise sizes, because to be fair, if they defend too frequently against a bigger raise size, that's going to result in them check folding too often post-flop and bleeding money to me. Or if they play very poorly post-flop, you want to see as many flops as possible, which may mean limping a ton and then seeing the flop very deep stacked, right? So do not be afraid to mix it up, and do not think that no limit hold'em heads up is just as simple as following this default strategy I'm about to lay out for you. So like I said though, this is the default strategy. So whenever you are on the button, this is the strategy that you should be using if you're going to raise to 2.5 big blinds or fold. And that is to raise with 81% of hands. Okay, nice and easy. You fold the absolute junk, these hands down here in gray, you raise everything else. This number 1 here means that you are playing this hand 100% of the time. We have ones and zeros. You're either playing at 100% or 0%. We're going to see that starting to get mixed as we go to different parts of the game tree. But now, take a second and ask, how should the big blind respond? And you know what? Pause the video and type in the comments which hands you would be 3-betting with from the big blind if you know your opponent is using this strategy on the button. Go ahead, pause the video, type it in. I'll wait a second. All right, are you back? Well, this is how the big blind should defend against this button raising range. As you can see, they should be 3-betting very linearly. They should just be 3-betting the absolute best hands. As you see these weights here, right? Pocket aces 3-bets every time, whereas ace-8 offsuit is a bluff. 3-bets only 10% of the time, 0.1, right? And we see some pretty junky hands 3-betting every once in a while, but we do see the best hand 3-betting very, very, very frequently. Also, we see the big blind calling a ton, quite often, right? If we go back over here to the initial pre-flop raising range, we see like Jack 4 offsuit folds. We see that roughly that same range, maybe a little bit tighter, is what continues against a raise. So you see total, the big blind is playing 20% 3-betting, 55% calling, which comes out to roughly 75% of hands total. If you're folding a lot of your marginal hands like King 4 offsuit and 7-2 suited heads up, you are making a big mistake. Now, ask yourself, what happens if you know the player on the button does not call 3-bets very often? Well, in that case, this strategy I've laid out here goes out the window. You should instead 3-bet a little bit tighter for value. You should get rid of some of these medium strength hands like maybe King 9 suited and Ace 8 suited and King Jack offsuit and Ace 10 offsuit. And you should instead start 3-betting with a very polarized range. You should 3-bet with the absolute best hands, these strong hands in this area. And then you should also be 3-betting with some hands as a bluff, usually the hands that are at the bottom of playability, like a lot of these offsuit Queen 4 type hands and Queen 2 type hands and King 2 type hands. Because your opponent is going to fold too often, right? So you want to be 3-betting with hands that block their calling range. So again, do not think heads up no limit hold'em is as easy as following a pre-flop chart. Pre-flop charts are great, but if your opponent will respond poorly because perhaps they're not using the pre-flop charts or because they think something about your strategy, then you should get out of line to exploit them, okay? All right, so this is the range that the big blind should play. And this is usually how I am starting off by playing when I'm playing against pretty much anyone. Now, let's say the big blind does 3-bet with this strategy, okay? Pretty strong, right? How should the player on the button respond? Well, it turns out they should actually be calling quite often. As we see, they get to call with a total of 37% of hands, and they're actually 4-betting 5% of hands. So they started initially raising 81% of hands, and they're continuing with about 42% of hands. So they're continuing with about half of their range, okay? Notice with the hands that they are calling with or continuing for the most part are mostly the suited hands, besides the absolute worst ones. And then a lot of the decently strong big card hands. One thing you will note is that the offsuit hands like King 7, 9, 7, 7, 6, etc. are always folded. You do not want to continue with these hands against a 3-bet. You're going to be in very, very bad shape. Do not think that you should call a 3-bet every time, but at the same time, don't think you should just drastically overfold to the 3-bet. Now, let's take a look at this 4-betting strategy really quick and take note of what the best 4-bet bluffs are, because you should have some 4-bet bluffs. Notice that we are 4-betting all the absolute best hands, pocket 10s and better and ace king, ace queen suited half the time. And then, for the most part, the bluffs are ace X offsuit. Notice ace 4, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8. All of these ace X offsuits 4-bet between 10 and 20% of the time. And every other hand in our range that is going to 4-bet is 4-betting just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the time, besides these marginal suited connectors, which also 4-bet about 10% of the time. This is where these strategies start to get very difficult to implement, and where you will hear a lot of the best players talk about using a randomizer, basically a random number generator. They'll have a random number generator, let's say 1 to 100. If it lands on 1 to 10, they would elect to 4-bet the hands that are 10% or less, right? If it lands on 20, they 4-bet the 20% hands. If it lands on 30, whatever. You get what I'm saying. You want to make sure that you are randomizing, or if you want to use an implementable strategy, you certainly can. I'm not going to say that that is what you should do against the absolute best players in the world, but it is reasonable to, let's say, if you take a look at these 4% hands, if you get a total of, 25 of them, let's say you take all of them, right? And you just randomly 4-bet a hand that is on the cusp of playability, like maybe, I don't know, Jack 3 suited or Queen 2 suited. It's probably going to be okay. I'm not going to say that's what you should do, but if you want to make your life way easier, just find a hand on the cusp and 4-bet it. That said, you will find that the hands that typically 4-bet are the ace X offsuit hands, so if you are going to find a random bluff, you probably want to lean a little bit more heavily into these ace X offsuit type hands because the blocker is relevant. All right, let's say we do put in the 4-bet. How should the big blind respond? Well, now they should 5-bet the absolute best hands, slow play pocket aces. Again, you'll see that they're 5-bet bluffs. Did I say 5-bet earlier? It gets confusing when you talk about 3-bet, 4-bet, 5-bet, etc. This is when you're going all in. They should go all in every once in a while with these low suited aces, ace 8, ace 7, ace 3, and ace 2 suited. Also ace jack offsuit, ace 10 offsuit, and king queen offsuit every once in a while. And then just the absolute best hands, while still calling pretty wide. Let's go back here to their 3-betting strategy. They're 3-betting 20% of hands, and they're continuing with about 13% of hands, so a pretty high amount. And the reason for that is because the 4-bet size is actually pretty small, right? Notice they have to put in 13 more big blinds into a pot that's going to go up to about 50. So they really don't have to realize all that much equity. Notice here, if the 4-bet was to a bigger size, like let's say 30 big blinds or 40 big blinds or all in, then of course they would defend with a much tighter range. But when you're facing a small 4-bet, you in turn must call decently often. Again, you're going to find the hands that call very frequently are the suited hands. So if we happen to see some young bucks challenging themselves against each other in the near future, you're going to find that a lot of the time when there are 3-bets and 4-bets, people are calling with these decent suited hands just to try to flop reasonably well. So that is the basic pre-flop game tree that you are likely to see whenever people are playing their heads-up challenges to prove who is the superior Texas-style player. If you do happen to play online, because you also want to play some heads-up, no-limit hold'em, definitely make sure you account for the rake. Very often we see people playing some sort of heads-up challenge for all of their money. Usually the rake, they're playing high stakes where the rake either is not relevant or they're getting 100% rake back or something like this. If you are playing, let's say, 5 cent, 10 cent no limit online, or if you're playing, even $1, $2 online, the rake is relevant, and because of that, you need to adjust your strategy. So essentially what happens is as the rake increases, the bottom hands in your range are no longer profitable, and you are incentivized to generally take more aggressive actions like 3-bet, 4-bet, 5-bet, etc. So here is the default strategy. Heads up, big blind versus the button, against a 2.5 raise. When there's no rake, as you see, big blind 3-bets about 20%. Big blind calls 55% and folds 25%. We already saw that. And if there is rake, a reasonable rake in small stakes games, you see now the big blind 3-bets substantially more often, 22.7% instead of 19.9%. They call way less, 45% instead of 55%, and they fold way more. This was taken from Michael Acevedo's book, Modern Poker Theory. Michael Acevedo is a coach at pokercoaching.com. Make sure you check out his content there. But that is definitely important to note. So you're going to find that if you just blindly follow GTO charts that do not account for rake, and you use those in games where there is a big rake, that could very easily be enough to make you a losing player. So make sure you are using the strategy that makes the most sense for the game that you are actually playing. And that does include the rake, it includes the blind structure, it includes, the type of opponent you are against. Make sure you are using the strategy that will make the most money for your particular scenario. And that is part of the skill of poker, is figuring out the scenario you are in and then capitalizing on it. So that's going to be it for today. I'm going to be making a few more heads up videos in the near future whenever we see some of the players battling against each other. I'm looking forward to that. Hope you're excited. Hope you're ready. Good luck. Have fun. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button. Also, all of these charts I've shown you today, the initial pre-flop raising chart, 3-betting chart, 4-betting chart, 5-betting chart, all of these are available for you completely for free in the link below this video because, why not? A lot of people think this information should be hoarded and that it should be sold for hundreds and thousands of dollars. But look, come on. It took 5 minutes to get these charts, and I'm giving them away to you completely for free in the links below. So you might as well take them. Go have fun, play heads up, get in there and battle, and enjoy yourself.